The Supreme Court just delivered a devastating blow, a 6-3 ruling that legal experts are calling one of the most consequential decisions against a former president in American history. And this isn't some narrow procedural technicality that can be appealed away. This is a categorical rejection of executive immunity claims that Trump's legal team has been banking on for months. When 3 conservative justices openly break with their ideological allies to rule against the man who appointed 2 of them, you know something seismic has just shifted in Washington. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss any of the videos I release. So, what set off this unprecedented judicial rebuke? The court's majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, explicitly rejected the argument that former presidents enjoy blanket immunity from criminal prosecution for actions taken while in office. This isn't just another legal setback or temporary roadblock. This is the highest court in the land declaring that no man is above the law, not even one who once held the most powerful office on earth. And believe me, when the Supreme Court speaks with this kind of clarity, you know something enormous has just detonated. Here's the full picture of what's been unfolding. Tensions between Trump's legal strategy and constitutional reality have been building for over 18 months, fueled by dozens of immunity motions, delay tactics, and increasingly aggressive arguments that a former president cannot be held accountable for any official actions. The pattern became clear early on. Every time prosecutors sought to move forward, Trump's team filed another motion claiming absolute immunity. Every time a judge ruled against them, they appealed. The strategy was transparent to legal observers. Delay, obstruct, and run out the clock. But everything escalated on January 14th, 2026, when the Supreme Court finally issued its long-awaited ruling in the consolidated immunity appeals. The court had agreed to hear the case on an expedited basis last fall, recognizing the profound constitutional stakes and the public interest in resolution. The decision, dated just 3 days ago, categorically rejected the broadest interpretation of presidential immunity that Trump's attorneys had championed. The majority found that while presidents enjoy certain protections for core constitutional functions, those protections evaporate completely when actions involve alleged criminal conduct for personal benefit. The opinion runs 94 pages, with Chief Justice Roberts writing for the majority and 3 separate concurrences adding additional reasoning. This wasn't about policy disagreements or prosecutorial overreach. It was about whether the Constitution creates a permanent shield for criminal behavior simply because someone once occupied the Oval Office. Smash that like button if this is making sense so far. Here's where it really gets serious. When the 9 justices reviewed the arguments in their final conference, sources familiar with the deliberations say several conservative members expressed profound concern about the implications of granting sweeping immunity. And let's be honest for a moment. A 6-3 ruling against a Republican former president with conservative justices providing the decisive margin is extraordinarily rare. It doesn't happen over routine legal disputes. It happens when justices believe fundamental constitutional principles are at stake. Here's what multiple sources and court observers say happened next. On December 18th, the justices held their final conference after months of briefing and oral arguments that stretched over 3 separate sessions. The internal discussions reportedly became heated at times, with justices wrestling over the scope of immunity and the long-term implications for the presidency itself. Sources who spoke with clerks familiar with the proceedings told legal reporters that Justice Coney Barrett, one of Trump's own appointees, played a pivotal role in shaping the majority opinion's reasoning. Meanwhile, Justice Neil Gorsuch, another Trump appointee, reportedly expressed deep reservations about the government's broadest arguments, but ultimately concluded that the immunity claims went too far. By the time the opinion was finalized in early January, the 6-3 coalition had solidified around a principle that would reshape executive accountability for generations. The ruling, spanning 94 pages with 3 separate concurrences, declares that presidential immunity applies only to actions that fall within the president's core constitutional duties and cannot be invoked to shield conduct that allegedly violates federal criminal law for personal or political gain. Drop a comment right now if you saw this coming. I read every single one. Now things get absolutely explosive. When Chief Justice Roberts began reading portions of the majority opinion from the bench on Tuesday morning, reporters in the courtroom say the tension was palpable. Trump's lead attorney, who had flown in specifically for the ruling, sat stone-faced in the front row as Roberts methodically dismantled each pillar of the immunity defense. The bombshell moment came when Roberts departed from his prepared text to address Trump's legal team directly. According to reporters present, the Chief Justice looked up from his papers and stated that the Constitution does not create kings, and no legal theory, however creative, can transform a former president into one. The word kings sent a visible ripple through the gallery. Several journalists noted that Trump's attorney immediately began texting, his face drained of color. This move sent shockwaves through the legal community and Republican circles alike. When the Chief Justice of the United States publicly repudiates a legal strategy in such blunt terms, it signals that the arguments have crossed from aggressive advocacy into constitutional absurdity. The claims that this was just another partisan attack collapse entirely when you see conservative justices providing the decisive votes. This isn't the first time a president has faced judicial reckoning over claims of executive power. Think back to United States v. Nixon in 1974. When the court unanimously ordered Nixon to turn over the Watergate tapes. The justices, including several Nixon appointees, rejected the argument that executive privilege was absolute. Nixon resigned within weeks of that ruling. Then there was Clinton v. Jones in 1997, when the court unanimously held that sitting presidents could face civil lawsuits for conduct that occurred before taking office. The key difference then was that Clinton's actions, while personally embarrassing, didn't involve alleged criminal schemes to overturn an election or retain power illegally. Subscribe immediately if you haven't yet. This content doesn't exist anywhere else. And let's not forget Trump's first Supreme Court defeat in Trump v. Vance, when the court ruled 7-2 that his financial records could be subpoenaed by a state grand jury. Many Republicans privately hoped that ruling represented the limit of judicial willingness to challenge Trump. Now, however, it's different. This time, the court has ruled on criminal immunity itself, the final legal shield Trump was counting on. The pattern is clear. When presidents push constitutional boundaries to protect themselves from accountability, even their own judicial appointees eventually reach a breaking point. So, what allegedly triggered this devastating rejection? According to legal scholars who have analyzed the ruling, Trump's legal team made a catastrophic strategic error by arguing for absolute immunity in the broadest possible terms. The immunity brief filed by Trump's attorneys claimed that a former president could not be prosecuted for any action taken in an official capacity, even if that action involved ordering the military to assassinate a political rival. During oral arguments in October, Justice Elena Kagan posed precisely this hypothetical, and Trump's lawyer answered, yes, immunity would still apply. Multiple justices audibly reacted with concern. Here's the kicker. The opinion directly quotes that exchange and calls it a reductio ad absurdum, a position so extreme it proves the underlying argument is flawed. Justice Barrett's concurrence specifically notes that the answer to the assassination hypothetical was the moment she knew the absolute immunity position could not stand. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. And here's what should alarm everyone following this case. This isn't just about one ruling or one defendant. If the court had accepted Trump's immunity theory, any future president could commit virtually any crime while in office and face no legal consequences afterward. Once that precedent gets set, there's no turning back. The presidency would transform from a constitutional office into an elected monarchy. This puts Trump's entire legal defense in a nearly impossible position. On one side, his attorneys spent months arguing that immunity was their strongest card, the argument that could make everything else moot. That means they prioritized delay tactics over building substantive defenses on the merits. On the other side, they now have to pivot immediately to arguing the facts of the underlying cases, trials. They've done everything possible to postpone. In jurisdictions where jury pools have been watching this drama unfold for years, they now have to explain to judges why they should get more time to prepare defenses they should have been building all along, a position that's nearly impossible to justify. And here's the tricky part. There's no credible appeal remaining. Either you accept that the Supreme Court has spoken definitively on immunity, in which case the trials proceed, or you claim that even the Supreme Court lacks authority to decide this question, which would require believing that no institution in America can hold a former president accountable for anything. Legal and political analysts are calling this a watershed moment in American constitutional law. Lawrence Tribe, Harvard law professor and constitutional scholar, told CNN that this ruling will be studied for centuries as the moment the court affirmed that democracy requires accountability. He explained that the justices understood they were writing not just for this case, but for the future of the republic itself. Do me a favor and slam that like button because it genuinely helps this video reach more people. Even Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law professor and frequent Trump defender, acknowledged that the ruling was more comprehensive than many expected. He emphasized that while he disagreed with some of the majority's reasoning, the core holding that criminal immunity is not absolute reflects a principle most constitutional scholars have long accepted. So, let's break down what this could mean. First, the immediate legal impact is staggering. The federal election interference case in Washington, D.C. can now proceed without further immunity-based delays. Judge Tanya Chutkan has already indicated she will set an expedited trial schedule. Legal observers expect jury selection could begin within 60 to 90 days, potentially putting a trial verdict before the November elections. Second, it creates cascading effects across all pending cases. The Georgia election interference prosecution, which has faced its own delays, now has binding Supreme Court precedent supporting accountability. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis can proceed knowing the immunity question is settled at the highest level. Similarly, the classified documents case in Florida receives a significant boost, though that case involves different legal questions. Finally, looking ahead, the political implications are profound. Every Republican candidate running in 2026 and beyond will face questions about whether they support a ruling that 3 conservative justices joined. Campaign strategists are already grappling with how to message this to a base that has been told for years that any legal action against Trump is persecution. A CNN poll conducted within 24 hours of the ruling found that 67% of Americans believe former presidents should be subject to criminal prosecution for actions taken while in office. Even among Republican respondents, 41% agreed with that statement, a significant crack in what was assumed to be unified opposition to accountability. The financial implications are also becoming clear. Legal experts estimate that Trump's defense costs, already in the tens of millions, will escalate dramatically as actual trials approach. Several of his co-defendants in the Georgia case are reportedly exploring plea negotiations now that the immunity shield has been removed. Each potential cooperating witness represents another threat to Trump's defense strategy. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious to see your perspective. But beyond the immediate legal fallout, this is really about fundamental constitutional principles. The concept that presidents are accountable to the law is foundational to our system. The founders explicitly rejected monarchy precisely because they believed no person should be above democratic accountability. If a president can commit crimes while in office and face no consequences afterward, the entire structure of constitutional checks and balances becomes meaningless. This scenario is causing what sources describe as controlled panic within Trump's inner circle. Reports indicate that his legal team held emergency calls within hours of the ruling to reassess their entire strategy. Some argued for continuing to attack the legitimacy of the courts themselves, claiming judicial bias and deep state conspiracy. Others insisted that such rhetoric, after a 6-3 ruling with conservative justices in the majority, would only further damage their credibility. One source described the calls as tense and chaotic, with multiple voices speaking over each other as the magnitude of the defeat sank in. The Republican establishment is equally fractured. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who championed the confirmation of all 3 Trump-appointed justices, has notably remained silent since the ruling. Other Republican senators have offered carefully hedged statements praising the independence of the judiciary without directly addressing the substance of the decision. The silence speaks volumes. When even loyal allies won't defend a ruling's target, you know the legal position has become politically radioactive. Meanwhile, Trump's most loyal supporters are absolutely furious at the conservative justices who voted against him. social media platforms have been flooded with attacks on Barrett, Gorsuch, and Roberts, with some calling them traitors who betrayed the president who elevated them. To the base, this ruling confirms their darkest suspicions that the entire system, even justices they were promised would be allies, is arrayed against their movement. Things escalated further when Trump himself responded within hours of the ruling with a series of posts across multiple platforms. He called the decision a disgraceful attack on the presidency itself and claimed the conservative justices had been corrupted by the Washington establishment. He specifically named Barrett and Gorsuch, accusing them of weakness and disloyalty, and suggested their votes proved the courts could never give him a fair hearing. Stay with me. What comes next will completely change how you view the situation. Here's what makes the response even more damaging. Trump's attacks on his own appointees essentially confirm what the majority opinion suggested, that his immunity claims were never really about protecting the institution of the presidency. They were about protecting himself specifically. When your response to an adverse ruling is to attack the judges you personally chose for the Supreme Court, you've revealed that loyalty to you matters more than any legal principle. Legal experts immediately flagged the danger of this approach. Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and senior prosecutor in the Mueller investigation, told MSNBC that attacking justices you appointed for ruling against you is perhaps the clearest admission that your legal arguments were never made in good faith. He noted that juries notice when defendants attack everyone involved in their prosecution rather than presenting substantive defenses. This goes far beyond a single Supreme Court case. It's about whether former presidents can use the legal system to delay accountability indefinitely while attacking the legitimacy of any institution that rules against them. If there are no consequences for Trump's conduct, both the alleged underlying crimes and his response to judicial proceedings, it signals to every future president that the legal system can be weaponized, manipulated, and ultimately ignored if you have enough political support. Constitutional scholars are already debating the long-term implications. Some argue this ruling will strengthen democratic norms by clearly establishing that executive power has limits. Others worry that the political backlash could undermine public confidence in the judiciary itself. What's undeniable is that we're witnessing a stress test of American democracy in real time. The question isn't just whether Trump will face trial. The question is whether the constitutional system can survive the challenge his response represents. It's not just about one man or one administration. It's about whether the American presidency has meaningful legal constraints or whether it's become an office that confers permanent immunity on its occupants. The founders designed a system of checks and balances precisely because they feared concentrated power. This ruling affirms that design. What happens next will determine whether that affirmation has any real meaning. If this blows your mind, hit that like button right now. Here's the situation. The Supreme Court of the United States, in a 6-3 ruling that included 3 justices appointed by Trump himself, has definitively rejected the broadest claims of presidential immunity. This is no longer a matter of partisan interpretation or prosecutorial discretion. The highest court in the land has spoken with unusual clarity and force. When conservative justices openly rule against the president who appointed them on questions of fundamental accountability, we've entered genuinely historic territory. If there are no further consequences, if the trials continue to face delays, or if political pressure somehow derails the proceedings, it sets a terrifying precedent. Future presidents could commit any crime, then spend years running out the clock on accountability while attacking every institution that tries to hold them responsible. Keep a close eye on this story. Judge Chutkan is expected to issue a new trial schedule within days. Trump's legal team has signaled they may attempt additional procedural challenges, though legal experts say their options have dramatically narrowed. And legal observers across the country are watching closely to see whether this ruling finally means what it says, that in America, no one is above the law. Before we go any further, smash that subscribe button so you never miss content like this. Here's where things stand right now. The Supreme Court has issued one of the most consequential rulings against a former president in American history. Trump's legal team is scrambling to rebuild a defense strategy that depended entirely on immunity arguments that have now been rejected at the highest level. Meanwhile, trials that have been delayed for years may finally move forward toward verdicts. This isn't just another news cycle that will fade away. This is a constitutional moment that will be studied and debated for generations. What happens next could determine whether presidential accountability is a real principle or just a pleasant fiction we tell ourselves. The evidence has been presented. The highest court has ruled. Now we wait to see if justice, delayed for so long, will finally have its day. The stakes have never been higher. The ruling has never been more definitive, and the constitutional reckoning has never been more immediate. Pause for a second and hit that like button if you're finding value in this coverage.